I'm going to say something brave and controversial right now. Sam Prendergast, good at rugby.
He's pretty good, isn't he?
He's pretty good. He's pretty good at rugby. Some might even say, and I recognise this as a hot take, he deserves to be in the national team.
Yeah, this is where all of our viewership in certain parts of Ireland,
like Cork, Limerick,
just dropped.
Just drops to
We're
zero.
praising one of the players in your national team, which is the whole country.
Yeah.
In fact, two whole countries in Ireland.
Yeah.
So that includes you. So we're praising one of the players who plays for your team, and he's playing very, very well. So stick with us. Stick with us.
So Ireland, would you say that was a smashing of Scotland?
We've just done that thing that they do where it's like you throw out your thing at the start and then you actually start the video. And then we come back to that later on. We've done that in real time. Sorry, what were you saying?
So would you call this a smashing? Ireland by Scotland?
I mean, is the title of this video, How Did Ireland Smash Scotland?
I guess it could be.
In that case, yeah.
No,
I've got to back the brand. No.
How would you describe this as in terms of the sort of margin and differential in performance?
I want to say they wore them down, but also there was absolutely no point in that game where I thought Scotland were going to win it. And that is the sad thing about this. And the reason for that
there was one point where I thought they could have kicked on and won it.
Yeah.
But that lasted about 40 seconds.
There were points where Scotland were very, very heavily in the game, right? But I couldn't help but feel like I've seen this film before and I didn't like the ending, you know? And from a Scottish perspective, like there were moments like that Hugh Jones break on the outside where Ringrose goes for the intercept, Henshaw rather goes for the intercept, miss it, very out of character regardless, and they go all the way upfield and you go, brilliant, this Scottish attack's doing the thing and it does.
Yeah.
And I love that, right? Because it's so good, and it's great to watch. But also, constantly throughout this game, I kept asking myself, is it worth it, right? And we'll probably talk about this more heavily in another video at some point.
Our plan is next week, most likely, to do a video on Scotland, on are they getting better, what's going on with Townsend, is this becoming a problem?
Yeah.
Because I increasingly think it is.
And I saw a lot of Scottish fans, or a couple of Scottish fans, not a lot, a few Scottish fans saying words to the effect of, that is the worst Scotland performance I've seen in a long time. Now, I don't think that's necessarily true, because they're up against an opposition who are very good at dismantling really, really good sides, right? And Scotland are, I would say, a really, really good side. I wouldn't say it's the worst performance. I wouldn't say it's necessarily even a terrible performance. I would say it's the same performance and you're bored of it, and I'm bored of it.
Yeah.
And I'm frustrated because I really want to see Scotland do well. I want to see them start winning some of these games where you go, well, they could win it, but they don't.
This team feel like they are stagnating in a manner they shouldn't, right? I thought Ireland's defence was absolutely fantastic, and we're going to, I imagine, mostly talk about the attack and kicking game.
Yes.
But their defence was superb.
Unreal.
Throughout the entire match. Every time Scotland threw things at them, 9 times out of 10, they had an answer. And often that answer was to dump them behind the gain line. I thought they were brilliant, but they are massively helped by the fact that Scotland are so predictable in attack now. They play this incredibly expansive wide-to-wide brand of rugby. They really go for it. They throw a lot of risky balls. They, attack through that 13 channel with a lot of support around them, an awful lot. And they lob it out to the wings, to try and get like a gain line carry, because they know that Duan and Darcy are good for beating a defender.
They're freaks. The pair of them, they're freaks.
So they use them an awful lot to get over the gain line because they want them to beat one defender, skip inside, then, recycle the ball, because you've suddenly got an advantage there that is probably greater than it would have been if you'd gone to the forward and you just had a number 8 carry, if you just had fakes and smash it up or whatever, right? That works fundamentally. That's grand, right? What Ireland did really well is they shut it down from getting out there by really blitzing the 13 channel, by really blitzing the outside channels, and by making, when they did go for those forward carries in between those, they caught them well behind the gain line. So suddenly Scotland playing this incredibly repetitive game plan that was reliant on their wingers getting the ball and making this ground, as well as the forwards continue to get carries so that they can get it wide, so they're not constantly on the back foot with the defence flying up in their face. And none of that was able to work because Scotland became so one-dimensional. And they stripped away the nuance in their game, and what they went back to is the same process they've been doing over and over again the entire Townsend era, and it became an incredibly frustrating thing to watch because their attack became so one note.
Yeah, it's infuriating to watch at times because it's in a way like sometimes you'll have probably like older fans who have watched more of kind of rugby in the 90s and 80s and so on, maybe even noughties a little bit, who will go, great, what if we just scrapped kicking and just played expansively all the time?
Yeah.
You know, let's see how much we can get our backs to do, right? And don't get me wrong, it's a really, really good brand of rugby to watch when done well, you know, and Scotland obviously do still kick a lot. That's still a big part of the game, particularly when they have Finn Russell on the pitch, which obviously they didn't in this one. I'm sure we'll address that in bit parts. I think Tom Jordan actually played pretty well in this game. I wouldn't say he was a massive downgrade to say what a world-class player Finn Russell is in theory, you know, compared to Tom Jordan, who's less experienced in the 10 jersey internationally. I wouldn't say it was a massive blot on them. Anyway, Scotland are very insistent, because it is their style, it's what suits them at this moment in time, on getting the ball wide really early. And as you say, Dylan van der Merwe and Darcy Graham's defenders beating stats will be quite healthy at this point, because they're getting the ball in positions where there's sort of one-on-ones and so on, and they're able to beat defenders because they're both freaks, right? But they're doing it so far behind the gain line that they do this, they beat the defender, they step inside, the rest of the defenders come across, great, where are you? You're at the gain line.
Yeah.
It looks like you've just ran 50 metres, but actually you're still literally where we started.
Ireland were, and in some ways it was a bit of a gamble to put Henshaw and Archie together, rather than having Ringrose in that 13 shirt as he normally fills, but it allowed them to put huge increased pressure on those outside channels, because you can have both of them fly up in the way Gary Ringrose is much more, you know, he thinks about things defensively, and he does fly out of line, but
he's regimented, is Ringrose.
Yeah, exactly. Henshaw is a big physical presence, and he can smash you behind the gain line in a way Ringrose will catch you behind the gain line.
Both those centres go for big reads in Henshaw and Aki. Both of those like to fly out and go for kind of the hero shot when it's on.
Yeah, and so Henshaw, out of character, misses one, but over the entire game, what he did a really good job of is just getting into the eye line and shutting it down. And if it did go wide, he'd then smash them. And it meant that Scotland, in order to get anywhere, would need to set so deep that they weren't making any ground over the gain line. They can't play really flat line, which is what they like to be doing when they're going forward. They never were going forward. I thought Ireland's defence was very good. And then you have their kicking game. And I thought Ireland adapted their kicking game in a way that felt very on the fly and like it was happening during the match. It could be Simon Easterby is much more of a fan of kicking the ball than Farrell is, because Andy Farrell, typically, it's a very rugby league thing, right? They don't really kick the ball, at least they've had at least 5 tackles first.
Sure.
Like, they are very set, they keep the ball more than any other team in the world, even when, over the sort of 2023 period, the kicking after 3 phases was in vogue. Very few teams kept hold of the ball because your chance of scoring a try went down drastically each phase on phase after 3 phases. Even then, Ireland started to keep holding the ball. Ireland were playing like 8, 9 phases before they kicked. And we have seen them carry that on as the game has come back round to long sequences of possession, as it was kind of always going to in response to that. And Easterby's team, however, kick an awful lot in first phase. They do an awful lot of immediately kicking if they don't like the situation. And I can't tell whether that is an Easterby adaptation this season, or I think more likely it's been Sam Prendergast spotting things and kicking, such as this ball here, which is a brilliant kick, puts Scotland under enormous pressure and eventually results in a penalty, which, you know, they don't score from, but they still get a penalty on the 5-metre line and they go for a tap move. Easily could have been another try.
9 times out of 10, Ireland do score those. This is the 1 time out of 10 when they don't.
Yeah, and what it meant is that Ireland's conversion rate was amongst the lowest it's been for a couple of years in this game, which you would say, you know, I think Steve Tandy, actually, to say Scotland conceded 32 points, he actually comes out of this game in enormous credit because Scotland's defence was very, very good. But there was a stat that came up on screen in the 20th minute of this match, which is that at 20 minutes, Ireland had been into the 22 6 times and they'd scored 1 try.
Wow.
Now, there's 5 instances in which they don't do it, but you look at that kick I just showed, which is completely on the fly from Prendergast. There's no way that's pre-called. He just looks up, sees the space, puts it in there. There's then like this kick in the second half. He does the same thing. James Gibson box, clearly got a call on the blind side. Clearly he's going that way. That's the play they've got called. Prendergast spots something about how the wingers come up flat. He puts them behind, traps them on the 5-metre line. Ireland end up winning the ball back in a moment later. It is just him spotting things on the fly. And clearly, I don't know if he's given more license for that, or this is just Prendergast doing it. I think there's probably a bit of both in like license rather than like a tactical thing.
I think it's fair. See how far you can push it.
It becomes that Ireland are so clinical when they get into 22, and they were below that standard the weekend, which like at the time I remember saying like I don't think the Ireland team is as good as it was a few years ago, because they would have, if they had 6 chances, 2 or 3 years ago, they probably would have converted 3 or 4 of them, right? Yeah. But the key difference is a few years ago, Ireland wouldn't have had those 6 chances. They would have been looking to get into 22 maybe 3 or 4 times because it would have been kicking less, it would have been keeping hold of the ball more, and then they probably would have converted more of those. They probably would have got, 2 tries from 3 visits rather than, as we saw at the weekend, I think it was 4 tries from sort of 20 visits. What they're doing is they're buying more tickets to the lottery, and so they're winning more often, even though more of their tickets are getting rejected.
Yeah. It's a really interesting thing, isn't it? The way that, as you say, I think that the licence to be a bit more instinctive has been pushed upon Prendergast, because he very much is in this team because he's the system player of this system, rather than because he plays the system better than Crowley, rather than because he's a better player than Crowley. That both of them are quite similar in that they revolve around the team. They're cogs, the pair of them, who also are very capable of the good instinctive moments that we see on the highlights reel of the pair of them. It's a great problem to have with them.
Jack Crowley, to me, feels like a guy who was grew up naturally playing a very attacking game of rugby. He then came through the Munster system, and they went, no, this won't do. You've got to be Ronan O'Gara.
Yeah.
We only make 3 players here. We make Ronan O'Gara, we make Paul O'Connell, we make Niall Ronan. You've got to pick one of those 3. And he went, can I be Niall Ronan? Can I be a hard jackling 7 who never quite gets the recognition he deserves? And they're like, no, come on, O'Gara it is. And so he's like clearly bolted this kicking game on to his game, and he's developed it to be really, really good because he plays in a team in which that is much more focused and has been.
Yeah.
Where Prendergast is playing the system that he has played since he was a literal schoolboy.
Yeah.
Like, he went to a school where he was playing versions of the Leinster playbook, and hence now the Ireland playbook, when he was 12.
He's got that bit sanded off,
Yeah.
I also love how you went for Niall Ronan instead of David Wallace. That's very funny. But, right, the Calvin Nash try. Let's just quickly look at that. When Prendergast gets the ball, there is actually, if you look at the overhead, a decent shot of him scoring his try himself. Yeah. And yet, he remains a threat to the line, as all good 10s are. Basically any 10 who plays at international level does know how to attack the line like that. And there's something of, I don't want to call it a mismatch, just a kind of misfunction, I suppose, in that Dylan van der Merwe is in the centres rather than on the wing. This isn't the bit he's used to. Is organising, getting on the outside, reading what's going on, while the ball is not in the air.
So Ireland here call a 8-man maul from the line out. They break off and they try to play. And what this does is it brings all the Scottish forwards into that main area, and then because they keep picking and driving at such pace around that ruck, it leaves them all staying there. The Scottish forwards all stay there. Ireland start to crab in field a little bit, and Finn Russell sticks onto the blind side. And him coming onto the blind side means that everyone on the far side moves in one. So do one, as you say, ends up in the centres.
Yeah. And we end up with poor old Blair Kinghorn just out on the edge himself.
Yeah.
And Gibson Park, lovely threaded pass in between the 2 second rows here to hit Prendergast in behind. And the beauty of this is Henshaw knows what line he's running. He's just there to interest Duan. If Duan looks up, he goes, oh, Robbie Henshaw's running at me. That's all he can think about. And the best part of Hugo Keenan's entire game, even better than his backfield cover, his kicking game, his defensive game and so on, is stuff like this. He's so unselfish with the lines he runs. Yeah. He just looks up at Blair Kinghorn and goes, great, there's one man in the line, he's got a decision to make. The decision is either me or it's Calvin Nash, right? If it's Calvin Nash, it goes further, the ball is in the air for a longer time, there's more time for him to go across. I want to make sure that that decision is me, so I don't get the ball. And it's absolutely brilliant. He squares up, he goes to the inside shoulder of Kinghorn. Kinghorn has no choice but to turn his shoulders in. When Prendergast throws this lovely ball over the top, Nash has held his width brilliantly on the wing as well. Really patient by him. He deserves the try for this alone. But at this point, there's nothing Kinghorn can do because he's got to run 2 directions at once. And it's so unselfish by Keenan. It's essentially an assist, right? He has opted to not score the try himself because he knows that it will give Nash more time to put the ball down. And for some reason, he runs like 7 metres into the in-goal area before he puts the ball down. But
just keeps running. Running. Gets those metres up on his fancy team.
It's good for the GPS. It's like, you've entered zone 8 there, my friend. Well done.
So I want to also mention that the position for this is set up by a first phase strike move for scrum. So they then get a series of penalties off when they play a really, really good attack. And I won't talk through the entire attack, but the first phase here, right? Sam Prendergast's touch is sublime. And sublime is the exact word I used to describe him last week. And a lot of people said I was being reactionary and I was just trying to be like controversial and have a take because he was obviously shit. He wasn't. I thought he was really good against England watching a second time. And you're like, oh, he's much better than I thought live. And
if we're being reactionary, so what? We're celebrating a great rugby player.
Exactly, because I thought he was superb. I wasn't being contrary, as some people said I was. This line, this touch is brilliant. So what he's looking to do here, right, is just get the Scottish centres to plant their feet. Because at that moment, they can't shift because Lowe is going to come onto the ball at some pace. And what he does is he really, really lines up those centres and then drops it in. You know, it's a superb dummy run alongside him. But his touch is so nice. He's kept two threats very alive, with both of them able to run different lines and adapt that threat. And Lowe has then hidden himself incredibly well for him to come on and be the real playmaker. He's kind of like a dummy playmaker or a kind of faux playmaker at the first up is Prendergast. It's such a nice touch. And then you have like moments like this all throughout the game. I just thought there were so many moments where he really brought players onto the ball. We had little pop passes or big, long, wide passes. I thought he was absolutely brilliant at getting players into the game. I thought he was a very, very clear man of the match. I think both from the kicking game perspective I talked about, but also just the way he opened Scotland up. And their defence, I think, in many ways won this game, but he was the reason that it was a bonus point win and it was by more than a score, really.
Him and Gibson Park both, I think.
Gibson Park's great.
The speed and range of passing and kicking for both of those guys. Like that one that Gibson Park dinked over the top where he had no time to see that and it just straight away bounces into Hugo Keane's hands. Incredible. But with those two, with the speed at which they can pass the ball, you can have the ball from the breakdown into the pod outside 10's hands or even 12's hands or whoever inside 2 seconds. Because their speed of the ball is phenomenal. The Doris try is a really good example of that as well, where Doris gets up straight from the scrum, holds his feet superbly, and he just trusts his 9 the whole way. It's only when the ball is in Gibson Park's hands that he accelerates onto the ball, that having somebody who can fire the ball at you like that, he just knows he doesn't need to set off too early.
That's the core of the Farrell attack, right? Is it's easier for Doris to get up, walk in a straight line and accelerate onto the ball than it is for Darge and Fagerson alongside to turn around, turn back, check the ruck, check they don't need to go in, look up, line up who they're going to tackle, right? In the time that Doris has got up and got in position, someone's cleared out, they're able to run in, he hits the line, he accelerates into it, brilliant carry, smashes through, grounds the ball, scores. Darge's task is 20 times as hard, 100%. Fagerson's task 30 times as hard, and they can't do it in the split second they're given. And the attack is just built on those tiny gains. It's built on the nature of rugby and how they exploit so much of that, so much of the work rate that's involved. Yeah, it's a really, really well-worked try. And again, Prendergast carries the ball, showing he does, he takes it to the line, keeps himself involved. I know I'm starting to sound like D4 media in praising him, but
it's almost like he's warranted it.
The thing is, right, Sam Prendergast, he's currently now the best 10 in Ireland. That hasn't necessarily been the case over the last few years. It wasn't necessarily the case when he got the jersey at first.
Doesn't mean Crowley's shit.
Yeah.
Crowley's great.
I really like the axis they've built with using Crowley as a replacement. He can come on, he can change the game in either direction, either as a kicking or a running 10. Or as we saw him use at fullback, which I think was an interesting option, developing him as a different option there in a game where there was some pressure on it, with a team that does kick the ball a lot, to test out how he works there at international level, which we haven't really seen from him. But also, Prendergast was just having like the best game of his career so far, so why would you bring him off? I think he is absolutely written off any critic, and anyone that's still standing to it, still standing to this oh, he's actually shit, he's actually too skinny, actually isn't ready for Test rugby, is unequivocally wrong at this point. It's just a boring conversation.
I'm going to beat you to it in the comments.
Last time I want to be having the conversation of going, is Sam Prendergast ready to play for Ireland? Obviously he is. He's the best 10 in the Six Nations so far.
I'll beat the comments to it, right? He misses that tackle on Ben White for his try. That's shit, okay? Yeah. And yet, I'm still going to say it was so worth all the other stuff he did in the game.
Yeah.
That he was absolutely outstanding.
You would take it if his contributions lead to being 32-5 or 32-7. Yeah,
exactly. Yeah. Last point, I think
I've got 1 point in Scotland.
I want to talk about Scotland as well.
Yeah.
I want to quickly look at Dewan's try before we wrap up, because what we were saying earlier about the going wide to wide thing, I think we kind of jumped onto the kicking game there. I just want to do one last point on that whilst we're here. A big part of creating a focal point in attack in international rugby nowadays is based around splitting the centres up in defence. It's making sure that only one centre, only one defensive organiser on each side of the pitch. If they're together, one of them can organise, one of them can hold off, the other one can shoot or whatever. There's a lot of combinations of what they can do here. And that is, to me, a big problem with Scotland's kind of wide attack, is that they're both on their feet typically, because they're typically playing off big open sides, so playing off an edge all the time. And they're both on their feet. One of them can go across and be that catch-up defender kind of thing, or can come up and actually pressure pressurise a pass in the first place, whatever. Now, this is really good by Scotland because they go from a tap penalty move from Dave Cherry. It's quite improvised here, and they hit it up in midfield a couple of times, possibly by chance, but I think it really works in their favour. And then they get it up on the blind side, and again, there's only one centre defensively here on this side for Ireland. Hugh Jones comes in at first receiver, and Josh van der Fleer is the last but one out with Hugo Keenan kind of half in the line.
Yeah.
Josh van der Fleer is there in that outside centre position. They've manipulated this. And it's a brilliant touch by Stafford McDowell because what he needs to do here isn't actually draw in a man, it's actually just beat a man. You know, it's or at least half beat a man. And he goes for that overs line, off the ball whilst it's still in the air, drifts on the outside onto it, so Van der Fleer has to go low on him to try and get into deck. Obviously, McDowell's a big carrier, wants to get over the gain line. Keenan then comes in as the secondary man because he has won the collision and he can get that offload in and do it. And obviously, it's a world class.
It's a phenomenal finish.
You know, you'd see that in the NRL and you go like, that's incredible. You know, and those guys do pretty exceptional things over there. So yeah,
Like cocaine.
Sure. I just think that's a really interesting note on Scotland wanting to attack short sides, you know,
Yeah.
and that by that I don't necessarily mean going back the way they came. Obviously, they're still going open side the whole way here, but they've shortened up the Irish defence here. And, you know, Ireland would be probably quite disappointed to concede a try like that, but it's great attack by Scotland.
Yeah. And there are a few passages of this, and I think we come back to the same frustration I had with Scotland in the autumn, which is they have absolutely no read of momentum. And I think there was one moment in this game, right after that Hugh Jones break that we mentioned, they are in complete ascendancy. They've just scored points. They've just kicked a penalty to get back into the game, you know. And then they decide to kick another penalty. And it doesn't really get them anywhere. It still leaves them out the game when really what they need is the crowd is behind them. They're up, they're on their feet. The team has been in the ascendancy. And against Ireland, you won't get many chances.
You have to stretch them because it would be a big upset.
And they don't get another chance in the game. They get the maul try once the game is gone, once the game is over. And it's the same thing we talked about in the South Africa game. Scotland had one moment where they got into the ascendancy and they kicked the points.
Yeah.
And we'll get into this more when we get onto the video on why Scotland have been so frustrating lately. But I just can't shake this feeling that they just have no read on a game when they're in it. That Gregor Townsend, clearly, I think, he will put this loss down to accuracy and he put it down to errors, when I think really it comes down to a complete lack of cutting edge and of vision for when chances are on and when the moments come to win games, right? It's something that a number of coaches talk about is games come down to big moments. And Scotland, consistency, fail to identify big moments when they're in them.
Yeah, and obviously some of that fall on the captain, some of that will fall upon the coaching, some of it even on the 10, you know, obviously a lot of decision making will go through, you know, the big decision making positions on the pitch. It's hard to tell from where we are who we can blame on this, but as you say, like,
I think it becomes a team
it's
thing.
unanimous, isn't it?
Yeah.
Because, you know, any of these decisions are made on behalf of the team. So it's a really, really difficult one. And it makes you wonder how much this will be solved by simply putting Johnny Matthews in there.
Yeah, at 10.
Yeah.
Yeah. I frankly think if in the next round of the Six Nations, instead of turning up at Twickenham with a full 23 players, they just bring out Johnny Matthews, Scotland's chances raise 86%.
Look, we have nothing to say that in 2025, the thing that wins the Six Nations isn't this random Scouse hooker who came through in his late 20s, who it turns out is an absolute baller.
What they need is a big Scouse lad. I say this of every team, particularly France.
Ben Kay starts at 5 next week for England.